Well, the Freedom Dividend is a universal basic income plan where every American adult gets $1,000 a month starting at age 18 until the day they die. So every American adult gets $1,000, and then you get it. You can do whatever you want, $12,000 a year, and it continues until you expire.
Well, first, to define the problem a little more thoroughly, I mean, when I did research for my book, The War on Normal People, I was shocked at what I found. Where I studied economics in college, and if you study economics, you're presented with relatively positive visions as to what happens if you, for example, you get rid of a lot of jobs with technology, that the workers find new roles, the economy grows, productivity goes up, and everyone's pretty much okay. But then when I was writing my book, I found that that's not actually what happens on the ground, that half of the manufacturing workers that lost their jobs in Michigan and Indiana left the workforce, filed for disability, got drunk, died early deaths, and got addicted to drugs. I mean, that none of that was in my economics textbook, if you know what I mean.
I do.
So then I was like, oh my gosh, like what we did to the manufacturing workers, we're about to do 8.8 million retail workers, the 2.5 million call center workers, and most importantly for you in this audience, the 3.5 million truck drivers and the 5 million Americans who work supporting truck drivers in facilities and truck stops and motels and diners around the country.
You call it a freedom dividend. How does the freedom dividend work?
Well, the Freedom Dividend, if you can imagine a country where everyone's getting $1,000 a month as a right of citizenship, it would make our families stronger and healthier, it would create millions of jobs in our communities, it would improve our mental health, would decrease our stress levels, would improve relationships. The best path to create that is to put economic resources into people's hands in the form of a Freedom Dividend of $1,000 a month, which would then allow more people to do the sort of work that either they want to do or that their community has a need for. And the goal is to create jobs, and putting $1,000 a month into people's hands would create at least 2 million new jobs, just because the buying power would just go right back into local businesses and communities. Now, how many of you own stocks of public companies that issue dividends? Many of you do. Verizon, Microsoft, Coca-Cola. So when these companies reach a certain level of success and maturation, what do? They return money to shareholders. I'm going to suggest to you all that the United States of America is at the exact same point, and that we need to start issuing a dividend to ourselves, the owners and shareholders of this country. And when Coca-Cola and Verizon and Microsoft issue a dividend, everyone says, great job, great management. It's time for us to do the same thing for the American people. $12,000 a year would be a game changer. The great thing is that if you look at our history, this is a deeply American idea. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King was for it in the 60s, called it guaranteed minimum income, and he championed it in 1967, the year until he was killed the next year. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists signed a study saying this would be tremendous for America. It was called the negative income tax. And it passed the House of Representatives under Richard Nixon in 1971, twice. And then it became law in 11 years later in one state, where now in that state, everyone gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. In what state is that? Alaska. And how do they pay for it? Oil.
Dividend that would go to every person in the U.S. would be funded how?
So the headline cost of this is $2.4 trillion, which sounds like an awful lot. For reference, the economy is $19 trillion, up $4 trillion in the last 10 years, and the federal budget is $4 trillion. So $2.4 trillion seems like an awfully big slug of money. But if you break it down, the first big thing is to implement a value-added tax, which would harvest the gains from artificial intelligence and big data from the big tech companies that are going to benefit from it the most. Slice a sliver of every Amazon transaction, every Google search. And because our economy is so vast now at $19 trillion, a value-added tax at even half the European level would generate about $800 billion in value. Now that
the VAT is generally considered a regressive tax because it's a tax on consumption and spending, and if you're low income, that's where your money's going. How much are you taking money back from the very people you're looking to give it to?
Well, you'd have to consume an awful lot for a mild VAT to eat up $12,000 in additional income. And so it is true in a vacuum, if you just adopted a mild VAT in the US, you might make it harder on working families. But if you are increasing the income of those working families by $12,000 per individual, you end up increasing the buying power of approximately the bottom 92% of the population. The second source of money is that right now we spend almost $800 billion on welfare programs. And many people are receiving more than $1,000 in current benefits. So we're going to leave all the programs alone. But if you think $1,000 cash would be better than what you're currently receiving, then you can opt in and your current benefits disappear. So that reduces the cost of the Freedom Dividend by between $500 and $600 billion. I'm a Democrat and progressive, and the last thing I'm running on is to try and take benefits away from people that they're relying upon for their survival or day-to-day expenses. So the Freedom Dividend is opt-in. And so if you decide that your current situation is superior, then you're left untouched and no harm done. I do talk to people who are on these programs, and some of them would vastly prefer $1,000 cash because there's this constant uncertainty that they're going to continue getting their welfare benefits because they're generally requirements that are associated with them. They live in fear. And there are also a lot of reporting requirements that are associated with them. So it's not that the existing structures are ideal for many of the people within them. But if you prefer your current situation, then the last thing I would want to do is take that away from someone. Now, the great parts are the third and fourth parts. So if you put $1,000 a month into the hands of American adults who right now, 57% of Americans can't pay an unexpected $500 bill, they're going to spend that $1,000 in their community on car repairs, tutoring for their kids, the occasional night out. It's going to go directly into the consumer economy. And so if you grow the consumer economy by 12%, we get $500 billion in new tax revenue. And then the last $500 billion or so we get through a combination of cost savings on incarceration, homelessness services, healthcare, because right now we're spending about $1 trillion on people showing up in emergency rooms and hitting our institutions. So we have to do what good companies do, which is invest in our people.
The point of it, really. They say if you give a man a fish, if you give a man a fishing line, he can fish. If you give him one fish, he'll just eat that fish, something like that.
People like my wife, who's at home with our 2 young boys, one of whom is autistic. And right now the market values her work at 0. Yeah. GDP values her work at 0. If you start putting resources into our hands, it actually expands what we think of as work.
Well, now you're talking about paying women for doing housework and doing work at home, being mothers. That's a good idea.
That is a good idea.
It's a game changer for the waitress at the diner who's getting harassed by her boss. It's a game changer for the single mom who's stuck in an abusive relationship.
Yes.
Like, we need to put the economic resources into people's hands to be able.
It's not universal basic income, though, kind of socialism by other means?
It's very much not. It's capitalism where income doesn't start at 0. Socialism, capitalism dichotomy is decades out of date and relatively useless. And I'm going to quote a friend of mine, Eric Weinstein, who said this. He said, "We never knew that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology." That's where we are. And so when someone's like, are you socialist, are you capitalist, they're essentially taking 20th century economic frameworks that never anticipated the economy of today.
Math inflation?
No, it will not.
Why not?
Well, I'll give you a couple data points on the inflation. So we printed $4 trillion for the banks during the bailout, and there was no inflation in consumer goods. And if you look at what's happening right now in your own life, a lot of stuff's getting cheaper or better. That's electronics, clothing, cars, media, food for the most part. All that stuff staying essentially constant in price or getting cheaper or more sophisticated. Now, what's going up in price? What's driving us all crazy? Housing, education, healthcare. Mm-hmm. And those three things are not being driven by the fact that we have lots of money to spend. It's not being driven by, like, purchasing power.
Universal basic income, you're taking away that dignity, that respect of having a job.
Well, the Freedom Dividend is actually very pro-work because putting this money into Americans' hands, that money would circulate over and over through their neighborhoods and communities. It would create more than 2 million jobs around the country and would also recognize a lot of the work that's being done in our families and communities that is not being recognized by the market. The second thing is that, you know what's really destroying the dignity of work is people feeling like they have to do jobs that are somewhat exploitative just in order to survive, and then us selling ourselves that, oh, that's actually super dignified. It's actually not dignified for someone to feel like they have to do anything under the sun just in order to make ends meet I was looking at ARP. They tell me it's not an acronym anymore, but I was going to say that the R is actually in question because half of Americans are never going to be able to retire. Just like you, where they're saying I have to work, work, work just in order to survive. And I have no interest in living in a country where I go into a convenience store, a grocery store, and there is an elderly American working just to survive instead of a teenager who used to do that job for beer money. Like
Scandinavian countries, that then people don't work enough or they don't want to work, they lose ambition. There's a negative effect to that. How do you pay for it, and how do you ensure that it doesn't mean people just don't contribute to society?
Well, when I've looked at all of the studies as to what happened when people got money, only two groups worked less. New mothers who spend more time with their children, and teenagers who spend more time in school and graduate at higher levels. I don't think it's
focus on a living minimum wage. What's your response?
Well, one of my issues with, I'm for a higher minimum wage. No American should be working and be poor. But a higher minimum wage does not help people like my wife, who's at home with our two young boys, one of whom is autistic. I mean, what does a higher minimum wage do for her? What does a higher minimum wage do for any of the caregivers or people who are spending time ministering to their loved ones? Entering an age where being old and poor is going to be the norm in this country. And so we have to change that. And my flagship proposal is the biggest expansion of Social Security that has been proposed in generations.
Will it ever replace Social Security for older Americans?
It would not. Social Security is here to stay. This is money that you put away. Someone described it as a forced annuity. We don't need 80% of Congress to pass this. We need 51%. You get this across the finish line in Congress, start getting more money into people's hands. This would become the favorite thing that our government's ever done in people's lifetimes. In America right now is we do not have the money. Just remember that. Do you all remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street? I don't remember that because none of us voted for it. Do you remember anyone looking around at that point saying, where's the money, where's the money? No, when they needed the money, we found the $4 trillion. No, it's time for us. It's time for the American people to enjoy the benefits of all the progress we made over the last number of years, and that includes veterans. First, I want to thank everyone who put me on this stage tonight. I am proof that our democracy still works. Democrats and Americans around the country have one question for their nominee, and that is who can beat Donald Trump in 2020? That is the right question. And the right candidate to beat Donald Trump will be solving the problems that got Donald Trump elected and will have a vision of a trickle-up economy that is already drawing thousands of disaffected Trump voters, conservatives, independents, and libertarians, as well as Democrats and progressives. I am that candidate. I can build a much broader coalition to beat Donald Trump. It is not left. It is not right. It is forward. And that is where I'll take the country in 2020. That's why I'm running for president. I'm not running for president because I fantasized about ever being president. I'm running for president because I'm an American and I'm a parent, and I can see the country we will leave to our children, and it is not something that I'm willing to accept. Thank you all.